it's been a quiet week on the Michigan football front, other than, last week we're in Nashville. The news breaks that Wink Martindale was going to interview for a pair of jobs as defensive coordinator with the Colts. They found their guy. I believe also interviewed with the Falcons. They found their guy. It sounded like the Bengals had interest, but really hasn't been much traction there. So as of right now, and again, the hiring cycle is really starting to fire up in earnest now that, obviously with the Lions being out, those are two big candidates. They're coordinators in terms of filling out jobs, filling out staffs. Maybe there's some more movement elsewhere, but now we start to really get a sense of if he's going to be back next year or not. And it seems like the last few days have been positive on that front in terms of hoping that Michigan retains this guy for another year.
Yeah, it'd be huge too. What they did this season, I think, was really impressive, including at the end of the year when they didn't have all their horses, Will Johnson for the back half, and then the bowl game, really none of the top players that are going to be going to the NFL this past season. So, some dominoes have fell in the NFL. I don't blame him for looking around. I don't blame NFL teams for saying, hey, this is a really good NFL coordinator who's done a good job in this league for a long time, that just so happened to take a 1-year hiatus, go to college football and, not master or figure out college football, but do a really good job and show that he is still a fantastic coordinator. And by the way, he left on his own from the New York Giants last year too. Obviously a weird situation there, kind of a falling out with Brian Daboll, their head coach, but this isn't someone that was forced out of the league. So 1 year off makes sense that there's some interest, but also makes sense that other guys are in the mix and they earn those jobs. Sherrone Moore told some reporters last week at the Michigan High School Coaches Clinic in Lansing that he feels like Wink Martindale wants to stay at Michigan, but of course he has contingency plans should he move on. So obviously, some good news for Michigan fans that he didn't land one of these jobs, but maybe not out of the woods yet, I guess. Just considering the fact, like you said, hiring cycle's still going. It's actually, more maybe the new staffs, like you said, Ben Johnson going to the Bears, other jobs that are open, they'll hire head coaches. Those are maybe ones to worry about, but it seems like the ones that had DC openings, that the head coach is coming back, some of those are getting filled.
Yeah, nothing imminent. Feels like they're out of the woods for now. I think, again, at this point, I'm not tracking all the openings in the NFL, whether it be head coach or, we know some of the key ones, obviously, but I feel like when you're looking for a timeline where, like, where's Michigan actually safe and actually out of the woods here? Probably the week or so after the Super Bowl, as some of those staffs come into full focus.
I think fans have gotten pretty familiar with that timeline there.
Well, some people choose to forget. And it goes a little longer for assistant coaches too, because that's the big piece there. So, Michigan fans hoping that they were out of the woods. That's come up a lot already, out of the woods tonight.
That's 3
in terms of their guy having NFL interest. Bit of that is back to a certain extent, but certainly we'll see what happens. It'll probably be a thing as long as he's here, but it's much different when it's your defensive coordinator compared to the guy who sets the entire tone for your program. So good news on Wink there. Other lingering questions. As we're just kind of doing a grab bag of topics to start here. Watch EJ's recruiting show tomorrow night. He'll give you the full scoop on everything that's going on there. But in terms of, when you have a 5-star out there, like a Ty Haywood on the offensive line, seems like things are trending in the right direction there. For all the people who have been questioning the allocation of assets in terms of NIL, well, looks like you're on the verge of landing another big fish because of a renewed push for NIL within the Michigan athletic ecosystem there. So looks like they have a chance here to end that 2025 class with a bang and land a guy that seems like has been trending to Michigan for a while. The visit went well. All the feedback's been good. It feels now just more a matter of when, not if.
Yeah, we had first heard Ty Haywood's name when we also heard Justice Haynes' name, like way back, but well before Justice Haynes entered the transfer portal, well before Ty Haywood decommitted from Alabama, which happened only last week. But as Bama Online, our partner on On3 Alabama site, reported weeks ago, they didn't really consider him a member of their class. He's been trending for to Michigan for quite some time. The decommitment was kind of more of a formality. Visits Michigan over the weekend. Things looking really good there. Obviously, a couple more predictions come in for Michigan to land him. No surprise before the late signing period in February. So that'd be big. It would just add to what's a really good freshman class coming in. And then, what they've done in the transfer portal with over a dozen pickups. Offensive line is one of those spots that they haven't landed their top guys. They're still maybe pursuing some, but you're building it up from the high school ranks. You have a lot of good young talent that's going to be in that offensive line room for years to come. So I know we have a question about it later on, but, asking about, is their method of how they're using the money and allocating things kind of trying to build through high school recruiting? Is that similar to an NFL team wanted to build through the draft and then kind of pick their spots in free agency? I think it absolutely is. They're showing that with the commitment they've made to some of these top prospects that are coming out of high school. And then, okay, yeah, we'll go get the number 2 running back in the portal, Justice Haynes. We'll spend for Mikey Keene, a quarterback who could have had other options as well, a guy who may start games here next year, and on and on. So I think it's a smart way to do it, but it's also an important year for Michigan next season. They want to win right away.
Yeah, you got to walk that line between, and again, people will argue that a school like Michigan, and maybe we sort of tackle the topic now and go a little more in depth during the Q&A session. But I think that when you're a brand like Michigan that really should be able to do both when it comes to transfer portal and high school recruiting, and I'm not necessarily saying it's either or, but when you look at the totality of this offseason and when you look at sort of this foundation that you're setting for, listen, they need to win games next year. They probably need to win more games next year than they did this past year, right? I think 8 or less next year would be a step back for them, given that the schedule is a little more forgiving, given that the offense should have much more of a pulse. At least we hope. If it doesn't, I mean, that would be an all-time backfire. It's certainly, I think they're in much better shape there than they were. But, when you're able to land a Bryce Underwood, and really, had they not landed a Bryce Underwood, there's not enough talent in the offensive line room. And, if you're telling me, and again, I'm not saying it's a choice that they've made or a choice that was on the table, but if I can take these NIL assets and decide to allocate it on a guy that I know is going to be here for 3 to 4 years, and I'm going to have time with him, and I'm going to get to develop him, and he's going to get to grow along some of the other pieces I brought in, I'm fine with that in lieu of a 1-year stopgap just to, and then you're right back where you were next year. Now, again, you want to strike the balance where you can do both, but when you look at what their 2 biggest needs this past year were: better offensive line play, better quarterback play. If/when they close this out with Andrew Babalola, who is enrolled early, will be going through spring practices. Haywood would be a summer enrollee, so I think you can kind of put him on the back burner until maybe 26 anyways, or at least late into this next season here. If you're telling me I've addressed that with 3 5-star prospects at my 2 biggest areas of need, I feel pretty damn good about where they are moving forward. Now, again, how big of an impact will that have next season? I think at quarterback certainly will be the biggest one. We'll see if maybe Babalola can work himself into a role in that 2 deep right off the bat, maybe even push for a starting spot. But when you kind of take a step back and look at the totality of what an offseason looks like, I'd be pretty darn happy if that's the final outcome.
Yeah, long term, for sure. I still have major questions about the O-line next year and in the offense in general. Weapons, you're losing Loveland, Mullings. I like Haynes. I like Jordan Marshall at the running back spot. Max Bredesen comes back. That's huge. Wide receiver should be improved just by virtue of, nowhere to go but up there. So, I mean, the offensive line has a ton to prove. It's going to be a big offseason for Grant Newsome and those boys.
It will be. And I wanted to sort of dig into this a little bit too. I think there's going to come a time and place where we go position by position, maybe sort of long form on here. But I mean, you sort of just hit on it. Like, are they better? Like, I think they're unquestionably better at quarterback. Are they better at wide receiver is it because of personnel? Is it because of play calling? Is it because of quarterback play? Is it all of the above? I'm still kind of having a problem putting a finger on where I am with these wide receivers right now, because I think the guys that they have are capable of much more. But the additions that they made, I mean, there's still a huge question mark. And the additions they made so far, I talked about this a couple weeks ago, like raise the floor, but how much does it move the needle? That's maybe my biggest question mark right now.
And like you said, quarterback play helps so much for wide receiver play. And I know that, Michigan hasn't had elite wide receivers. And, with competent quarterback play, even when Cade McNamara was here, they were able to kind of get by. They had obviously an elite run game, elite offensive line to lean on. So that helps. I think that's what a lot of people banked on coming into last season, knowing that, okay, not a ton of weapons at receiver. We'll see about who the quarterback is, but at least they'll be able to run the ball, protect, be that physical team that wears the other team down as the game goes on, control the football, time of possession, all those things. So, with the O-line being a question mark, that creates some concern a little bit, because you don't have everything else figured out except wide receiver. You have an offensive line that has a lot to prove, like we said, potentially freshman quarterback coming in here and starting, and a wide receiving core that doesn't have anyone that's all that proven. But again, I mean, quarterback play can cover a lot of warts, and I think that it is going to be improved quarterback play next season. You look at even Georgia this year, a lot of complaints about their playmakers, but part of that was because Carson Beck seemed to take a step back, and they lost two fantastic players, Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. So if Michigan can find a little more of a balance there, better quarterback play, and the receivers stepping up a little bit more, then I think they could be in a decent spot offensively.
And the offensive line, that's the engine. I mean, that's what sets the tone as much as anything in this program and in a lot of programs. Look at the two teams playing for a national title tonight. Like, I don't think you make that run regardless of what the sport looks like compared to years past without being good up front on both sides of the ball. I mean, that is what is going to determine Michigan's success next season and into the future. From an offensive line perspective, I have those same questions there. There are guys that could compete at tackle that maybe also compete inside. There are guys that are coming back that, just because you come back doesn't mean you're going to get better, right? So I have struggled to kind of understand why they haven't maybe aimed a little higher, and maybe they have in the transfer portal. There were guys that they were in on that, maybe were inside that top 100 or top 3 or 4 guys at each position. But I am concerned about that. And it's no disrespect to the guys that have come in, but when the additions that you've made are from Cal Poly and Ferris State, I can't say it's going to work one way or another, or what the type of impact those guys will have. But when you have a guy like Sherrone Moore who has an offensive line background, I'm a little bit surprised that they weren't able to bring in someone at least a little higher ranked. That's not to say they're a better player or not, but maybe a little more fanfare was surprising to me.
They could use Ladarius Henderson and Olu Oluwatimi, guys like that. They've done it in the past. So, yeah, I don't think that they've made that type of addition, or even a Drake Nugent to this point. But we'll see. I mean, some of the more valuable guys Michigan's gotten out of the portal the last few years have come in the spring. So there's still time.
Any other lingering questions? I mean, I feel like we'll see on Wink. We'll see it. Those two positions throughout the spring defensively. I mean, really, at this point, we're only really waiting on Rod Moore as someone to make an official decision, and everyone expects him back. I believe the NFL draft deadline has passed, so I don't know if there is any other decisions out there.
Yeah, Rayshawn Benny coming back is huge, because you at least have a guy who, probably could have been starting the last couple of years up front, and now he's going to get that opportunity. He was just behind Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, two of the best defensive tackles in program history. I mean, Mason Graham is as good as it gets in college football, so he's going to get that chance this season. and you brought in some help alongside him and alongside some of the younger guys who are emerging. I mean, Trey Pierce and Oetta, they earned some time. Ike Awuna will be a fifth-year senior, but you brought in Trey Williams from Clemson, Damon Payne Jr. from Alabama, guys that were kind of Rayshon Benny's at their previous school, where they were kind of like a rotational guys. Now they'll play a similar role, maybe a little bit more here alongside Rayshon Benny, who I think deserves a much bigger role than he's had. So I like that. You mentioned Rod Moore. I think the deadline that's passed is for guys that are juniors or, aren't either graduates or on track to graduate in 4 years. They released that list last week, excuse me. So I think he still could technically go, like Quentin Johnson last year, was going to go and then decided to come back. But I don't blame anyone for negotiating the best possible NIL or revenue sharing deal for themselves, because especially when they know that they are a valuable player to this team. Rod Moore is as valuable as they get. For a guy that you'd have to pay for one more season, I mean, he's the guy I'd probably pay the most if I'm in charge.